and welcome to the DIY Photo Organizing Podcast, focusing on topics to help you with your photo management. I'm Chantal from Photos in Order.
And I'm Fiona from Photo Helper. Hi, Chantal.
Hello.
Hello. And we are thrilled to have a beautiful special guest with us today, Hazel Thornton from Organised for Life. Hi, Hazel, and welcome.
Hi, Chantal and Fiona.
Hello.
Nice to be talking to you today.
Yeah, lovely to have you with us. We're really thrilled to have this conversation. So before we jump in, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Hazel, just so you've got a little bit of background and why we are excited to have her with us today. So Hazel is the creator of the Clutter Flowchart collection. Hazel's based in Albuquerque in New Mexico, and she combines her genealogy research skills and professional organising experience to help clients tell the stories of their photos, their families, and their things, which is really interesting, actually. Her latest book is called What's a Photo Without the Story? How to Create Your Family Legacy. And that is just perfect for, our listeners, for us. We can always learn more about this. So we're thrilled to have you with us today, Hazel. And I'm going to fire the first question off to you just to get us started and to learn a little bit about you. Can you tell us about yourself? Can I jump in? I want the photo on the cover of the book. When you tell us a bit about yourself, can you include that in there? Because it's such a beautiful story, and I think it just sets off the start of where we're going to go with the power of photos. But a bit about yourself, the photo, how you got started in this field.
Well, first, let's back up about 17 years. First, I had to get laid off from my career at the phone company to even get into the organizing field. I knew I wanted to be an organizer in my retirement, but my retirement came a little sooner than I expected. And I became a professional organizer, the kind that organizes homes and offices and schedules. And about 10 years into that, I was a member of NAPO, the National Association of Professional Organizers. And about 10 years in, I discovered what was called APO at the time, now is called the Photo Managers. And that's where I met you guys.
Yep.
And when I joined the Photo Managers, I had ideas of being a virtual digital organizer, but I never quite made it there. I got distracted joining the Photo Managers. People talk so much about families and the photos of your families that it rekindled my love of genealogy, which had been on the back burner while I was having my organizing career. I had not done anything. So I got back online and, oh my gosh, all the records that I had to go to local libraries, and not just local ones, but I had to travel to get documents to document my ancestors and visit cemeteries and all that good stuff that people should still do today. But it was so much easier now with all the records that are now online, which they aren't all online, but it's just easier. And so I started doing genealogy for other people again. I mean, not again. I started doing genealogy work for other people. And I got further and further away from organizing. But but with the background of organizing, I realized, that how they went together, the organizing and the genealogy. And I also noticed that people were, completely overwhelmed, as you guys know, with their photos and needing to organize them. And they were, they needed help. They need your help. They need all the help of all the photo managers in our association. But I liked supplementing that with the stories of their families, that some of the stories only they know. And if they don't document them, others will never know. But then there's also photos you run across what's like, well, who's that? Or what was going on there? Or where was that taken? And if you just do a little bit of research, not even very much sometimes, you can find out if you don't know. If you don't have elders to ask, or if you're not sure what they're telling you is quite the full truth, because they've forgotten or whatever, then you can find out. And so the more I realized people weren't finding out, the more I wanted to teach them how to find out. And one of the you asked about the photo on the cover. That's my namesake grandma. Her name is Hazel Clay Thornton. And I think I love that photo. I call it the bathing beauty. And I knew about when it was taken, just from the fact that she was still alive because she died young, and the fact that the bathing costume, dated it as being the 20s. But there was this big old hotel on the back of her that I couldn't figure out if it was a hotel, if she was vacationing, if she was, where in the world was she? And who was taking the photo? So I did some research, and part of the story, I tell the whole story. This is the longest story I tell about my family, because it's not a book about my family. It's a book about how you can research your own family, but I do have some examples. And this is the longest story. And I found out what the name of the hotel was. And what the point of the story is, well, one of the points is that you can find out things. And I tell you how I did this one, and how I found out the stories behind some other photographs. But also it's an example of a photo that I love so much that I never saw one time until I turned 60 years old. It's like, it was in an album that my dad had. Why he didn't show it to me sooner, I don't know. I think this happens in a lot of families, though. Some families just don't talk about their family, their photos, and go sit down and go through the albums. Some people do, some people don't. Mm-hmm. And we kind of didn't. And we did like family slideshows when we went on vacation. We'd show our vacation slides to friends when they came over, but we didn't go back into those old albums and tell stories about the people and document.
So Hazel, can I ask, I'm curious, when you found out about that photo, and I wanted you to bring it up because I love it, and I love the story that you tell in the book, and I think that's so telling of what the book is and how helpful it is, because just one photo really does give an example of all of the information and the resources and the things like that you cover. I want to ask, what you share your sort of discovery of how you felt and what that has meant to you. What kind of a journey did your dad go through on that? I'm interested, as far as, you wanting to, not having seen it before from your point of view, or like you were just saying then, he hadn't sort of shown it, but it sounded like it wasn't intentional or anything like that.
I didn't grill him about why he didn't show me the photo. So he didn't talk about it, and I didn't talk about it, both, really, kind of.
But was he interested to see your joy through the photo?
Yes, but also he died last fall. He died before the book came out. And he knew I was working on it, though. And there were several other photos in the book that he supplied through his photos, his photo albums. So I guess that's the answer to that. He died, and I don't know the answer.
Yeah. But I think it's an interesting. I think it's an interesting thing, because as you say through the book, you talk about, the people that are going to see these stories and hear these stories and learn, and you just never know, now going forward, who else will be able to. And I guess it's a real gift that you've been able to have that photo now and learn about that, and share it moving forward, and for your generation and extended family and family to come.
Yes, and that's, people ask me a lot of times, why is it so important to tell the stories of our photos? And I think it's because I think it benefits every generation. It benefits our ancestors to not be forgotten.
Yeah.
And it benefits us today to, I can't say, that I'm closer to my dad because of it, because of circumstances, but the rest of my family is interested in these stories that I've uncovered and that I write blog posts about, and some of which I told brief versions of the stories in the book. And, but then also your own, I don't have children. And a lot of people say, well, what if I don't have children? And what if nobody cares about my stories, right? Well, the answer is if you become interested in your stories and start telling the stories, you can deposit them in places like on ancestry.com, just to name one, and you can benefit just because you don't have any descendants. If you go back a couple, 3 generations, your ancestors have lots of descendants. Yeah. And if you don't think so, then go back one more generation, to find the descendants. So you've got living distant relatives today who might love to hear those stories. They have the same people on their tree as you do, and to know what became of those branches of the family.
Yeah, and I love that you covered that in the book, because it was one of the things I wrote some notes about, where, what happens if your family either don't care or you don't have any direct, like you're saying, and being able to, you use the word embellish. That was one of your topics as far as what to do, and share, and document and donate and upload them to these things as well. What I loved about that embellish section was learning more about the photo or the story behind what it is, the date, like you've talked about. It's not just photos or it's things as well, and different things like that. But embellishing it is really just finding out more. And then I love that you've done that as examples through the book. Yeah. And so
a lot of genealogists, there's people who take photos. I mean, this covers a spectrum of people. Some people take photos and don't tell the stories. Genealogists, they dig up names and dates and they put them on a tree, and they still don't tell the stories. And even if they do, their stories are going to be made so much more interesting by adding photos. Yeah. And the photos are going to be so much more interesting if you can add some genealogical details and some details about what was going on in the world at that time, or in that neighborhood where they lived, or it makes it, like, a lot of genealogists complain that their family's not interested in the work they do, the genealogy. And that's because it's boring, and you can make it so much more interesting by adding the stories and adding the photos. That's what I mean by embellishing.
Yeah. I know, exactly. That's exactly right. Embellish it, not just like, she wore a blue bathing suit. It's like, it was, like just more detail. And I think that's the richness of what you're saying here. And I really encourage our listeners, to think about when they're going through their photos. Obviously, we've got people that listen to us that have all got photos. That's why we're all here. Yeah. And so when they're going through that, looking through and deciding what they're keeping, and the practical parts of organizing, which you do go through in the book as well. But it's that richness in the embellishment of the information about and surrounding that photo. And it does take time. I mean, let's face it, and that's one of the things that Chantel and I were talking about just before, weren't we, about the different categories that you go through when you raise a point about, how much time and effort and options you've got to go into these details, because
that's the DIY part. It's like, if you think you have no stories to tell, well, here's a few things I'll bet you could do. And that would be the low effort, do this if nothing else category. And if you've got a little bit more wherewithal, put in a little bit more effort, medium effort, and your family will thank you for it. And if you are a professional, it's the book is meant to help people at all levels, but I'm trying to reach people who think, well, I'm not a writer, I'm not an organizer, I'm not a genealogist, I can't do that stuff. But yeah, you can. And if you want to put more effort into it, if you are either just become interested and want to put more time and energy and money into it, or if you're a professional and you already know the basics and you want to put more into it, then you can, that's the high effort category, and you can ask for help if you need it. There's resources to help you do everything, and there's lots of resources in the book too.
Yeah, that was really one of my absolute favorite parts in the book, with those tiers basically, and also because I think that's reality, and you also mentioned throughout the book that this thing is not going to be done in 2 hours. It's ongoing, and if you like you get the bug, you never stop again. You start somewhere and you're not going to stop, and that's the reality. And sometimes you also mentioned that, I think, that it rests for maybe a month or for a year or 5 years, and that's okay, and that it can become a hobby. And I really like that aspect. It's very practical and real.
So actually, just talking about where do people start, let's maybe let's sort of talk about that for a second. Like you're saying, people that may think it's sort of overwhelming, without sort of, obviously you've got pages and pages of it in the book, but let's just go high level a little bit. Where can people start if they've just if they've never done genealogy, or they do have some photos that they're interested about? What are some of the things that you'd suggest?
Well, if you want to get into genealogy, the first thing you need to do is to write down what you know. Start with yourself, add your parents and your siblings and their birth dates and death dates and where they lived, and start there. There's a link on my website, and you can Google it. You can Google family group sheet. And so you start with family group sheets, and then you can, there's lots of free ways to do genealogy. One way that is not free, one way that's free is a site called Family Search. And the thing about Family Search is what you're doing is you're helping to build a world tree. So it's not your own personal private tree. If you want to pay money to a company like Ancestry, that is a private tree, that is for yourself, but you can still collaborate with people on there. If I was thinking about, I don't know where, if you probably do have listeners all over the world.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about Australia, and I just so happened to recently this is like the Australia month for me, because I just finished a genealogy project for an Australian. And I'll have to say it was different. It was different from American, United States genealogy. And so wherever your listeners are from, one of the free resources is called Cindy's List. It's spelled CYNDI ' list. And she has thousands and thousands of resources. So you would go to Cindy's List, and then you'd type in Australia, and you'd find out all kinds of Australian resources if you're from Australia.
Yes.
But you start, no matter whether you hire help or try to do it yourself or pay or don't pay, you need to start with the family group sheets, and don't skip back to great grandpa. Start with yourself and build backwards, because if you're going to build a family tree online or on paper, you need to start with what you know and go back in time, one step at a time.
Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that with the cultural or country differences, because this is something I've noticed. I'm working on our family tree in the bit of genealogy with my mom, but I'm from Switzerland, so yeah, the tools, and when I did try Ancestry, for example, but there's hardly any information, because it's mostly I shouldn't say it's mostly American, but it probably is. So it just all works different, and there's different sources I needed to tap into. So it is interesting. There are very big differences, and unfortunately, we don't have anything that good as ancestry.
I'm not sure whether, in the case of Australia, I'm not sure whether it's because, I mean, the records exist, but you can't get them easily through the online programs. You have to send away for them and pay for them, which is what we used to have to do here. So I don't know if it's they're just not caught up to the curve of digitizing documents and putting them online, or if it's a decision that the country has made about, we'd like to make some money on these things.
Well, that could be possible, couldn't it?
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know which it is, but I noticed a difference. And then, of course, there are countries where, like Eastern European Jewish genealogy. Well, I've done that too, but I'm not doing that anymore. That's really hard. Somebody I can refer those jobs to. And the reason it's hard, I mean, countries where there was a lot of boundary changes due to wars, that's hard, or records being destroyed because of wars, that's hard. And so I'm not saying I've never done anything that wasn't hard, but I'm more equipped because I have more experience in doing United States, including colonial, including back to the 1600s genealogy.
So it sounds like, if you hit a roadblock, there's other avenues. You just kind of keep fishing and looking and going off on tangents, and that comes from experience.
Well, in genealogy, we call those brick walls.
Okay.
I have a whole section of my book about how to break down brick walls. And here in Albuquerque in the Southwest United States, we call them adobe walls.
That's great.
So it does take experience, but I do have a list of about 20 of them in my book.
Yes, I like that list. I looked through that one too. One of the things that I found interesting, Hazel, is that you talk about not just photos. When you're talking about family history, can you share what other things you incorporate or others can think about when they're looking at, if they're wanting to embark on something like this?
You're right. It's not just photos. It's memorabilia. It's keepsakes. It's the painting on the wall that the history of, that maybe nobody else knows why it's been on the wall their whole lives. You think and you think they know, and maybe you told them once or 5 times, but they might not remember when it comes time for you to, hand these things off to your family, whether you've decided to or left with these things. They might not know. So if you can tell the stories of your things too, your special things, you can, if this pen is, my great grandpa made this pen, and it's more special than this pen that I got from a vendor at a trade show, then I need to tell the story about this pen and make sure that people know that this one's okay to donate, and this one you might want to keep in the family. And it's
that's
still up
amazing. That's amazing, Hazel, because I have a pen from my grandfather. And
oh, really?
Yes,
oh,
he was a wood turner, and I have a pen. And it's amazing that you brought up that example. I'm going to take a photo of that pen.
I've never used an example before. I usually have a mug, and this is not a mug, so I didn't say mug.
They are my favorite pens. I mean, I don't use them. They're kept on a place in the lounge room. But they are very special. And I remember that the sawdust on, what was that? Sorry.
You ever write a blog post about that pen? It seems like I read a blog post about something.
Maybe I did. Actually, I might have put it in I had one with my grandmother in the kitchen. And so it might have been with the sawdust, He used to have a handkerchief and tie it in knots on his head. And yeah, that pen reminds me of that.
So if you don't want to comb through your photos and tell stories, go around your house and pick out the things that are special to you.
Yeah.
And tell their stories by either verbally telling somebody, again, it's better to write it down though. Either just, write a Word document in your computer, or write it, if nothing else, put it on a super sticky Post-it note on the back of the painting that's on the wall that nobody knows what it is. Because so they'll know. And so it will help them when the time comes. It will help them decide what to do with your things. And they won't be as overwhelmed with, I don't know what to do with this stuff. And because people do get overwhelmed when they're left a bunch of stuff. They don't know which special and what's not.
Yeah, it's true, and that is a really good point, because it is a place from you being an organizer, and looking at sort of going into that organizing and doing organizing as well. You know what it's like, and Chantal, you've obviously done that whole organizing, and people do hold on to these things because they think they might have been important, and it's a really difficult place for people to be in, to let go and move through. And because they don't know, it makes it even harder.
Yeah, it's not just, we keep talking about legacies, but what we really want is a meaningful legacy. And that's what you're saying, Hazel. That's what we need the stories for. And we need to have it recorded somehow. So what do you say to someone who's like, oh, I can't write, that's not my thing, and you hear that a lot, I suppose.
Just it doesn't have to be something you're going to publish in a book. It doesn't have to be something that anybody else reads in your lifetime. But even the most, even Pulitzer Prize winning novels start out as a first draft. And so if you just don't expect so much of yourself the first time that you start writing a story, then you can get the idea of it. It's not necessarily for anybody else's eyes during your lifetime. But if you like it, you can share it with your family, and you can share the photos and the stories with your family.
So how do you do that from a practical or technical perspective? We mentioned a few online tools that we can use, and we can add data and information to it and also draw from it. But, it's always a bit like those things in the cloud, they tend to disappear eventually. It's like, how do you record things in a way that you feel this is going to survive a few decades, and it's not just going to go away and totally be dependent on an app or something?
Well, it's just like digital. If you're going to use your computer to write with, it's just like digital photos. Digital writing is kind of like digital photos. If you have a hard copy, a piece of paper that you've written on, that's a good thing as long as you keep it in a folder and people know where it is, and it doesn't get lost, that will last for a long time. Just like printed photos are a good actual way to back up digital photos, print a few of them out.
Yeah.
And if you start creating a family tree, either online or on software on your computer, and you start writing stories online, digitally on your computer, then you need to keep up with, you need to back things up. I've got a section in the book about backing up digital files, and you have to tell people where the files are. You have to say, I've left instructions, and here's the file they're in, and here's the password to my computer. You have to tell somebody where it is so that they can find it. Otherwise, it's no good. And if you don't have anyone to say that to, if you're telling stories about your ancestors and you're getting into genealogy and if you've got a tree online, you can put those stories online and they will stay there. And it doesn't matter eventually what happens to you or your computer. You've stored them in a place where other people researching your family, you're not your individual family, but your same ancestors, your common ancestors, they can find them there.
Yeah, fantastic. So I'm interested, just one more thing. with your clients that you've worked with, and when you've helped people go on this journey, and you've sort of seen people go on this journey before, what kind of when they find out a bit of information, or they discover something that they've been searching for, I can imagine that would be a feeling of satisfaction, reward.
Well, it depends on what you find. I asked them, do you want me to tell you everything? Because and it's not, I'm not really asking them. I'm sort of warning them that I might find things that they might not have anticipated.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite things is to try to corroborate or disprove a family legend.
Right.
And if I can corroborate it, usually they're like, I knew it. Or if I can't, they're like, oh, I didn't think so. I mean, it depends on what they thought, whether it's true or false, how happy they are or not with what I find. And also if I find, they've got an extra brother that didn't know about or something like that, that can cause problems.
Yeah. I was just ask that. Have you ever found people that were not supposed or
not expected?
Yeah,
yes.
I'm sure.
Right. I had one woman who I found out that she possibly had a Cherokee ancestor. And I thought most people are like, oh, that's cool. But like everybody claims they have a Cherokee ancestor, even most of them really don't. But she was like, oh. And I'm like, oh, I didn't even know. I didn't expect someone to not like that. Usually people are claiming it falsely.
So I'm also interested when you do that work, and you find things or you don't find things, and you have all those different sources that you go back to. Do you record what you do as you do it so that you can sort of say, okay, this is, verified information, and I've got the information from this source or from that source? How do you
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And anybody that I'm teaching how to do it themselves, that's a critical part of the project, is to document your sources. Right. Because there's just no point in saying, you're related to the King of England if you can't prove it and document it and recreate the steps you took to prove it.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you tell me that you're descended from anybody, and you have no documentation on your online tree, it's possible you've got the documentation at your house in a drawer and I haven't seen it in paper form, but it's also possible that you just clicked, accept every time the program said, oh, you might be related to this person. And we call that climbing. You need to be climbing your own family tree. You don't want to be climbing someone else's family tree. Yeah. And if somebody said, if the program, like Ancestry, for example, but they all make suggestions. They said, well, you might be related to this person, but they don't mean you are, and that they can prove it. The computer doesn't know anything.
Yeah.
It's the other people, the people who submit the documentation and who say, I'm related to so-and-so. And if you look and see that they have no documentation for that, then you can't assume that you're related to so-and-so.
Yeah.
That's why they call them hints. And if you their hints can pan out or not pan out. But a lot of people, I had someone tell me just the other day, oh, I got into genealogy and I'm already back to the 1600s in a week. I'm like, oh, is that so?
Right.
It took me years and years to verify each little step of the way back that far,
Yeah.
And it's equally easier to make mistakes.
And that's what I think, that's what I love about the book, is that you and what we're talking about today, for people that are listening, is you can go into that much detail, and you can choose to go into that that depth, but you can also still get the benefit out of, if a photo you've got a photo that you're telling a story about, or you've got an item that you're telling a story about, a bit of memorabilia or something, without having to do that.
Exactly. If you don't go back any farther than here's grandpa's pen, I want to tell you a story about it.
Yeah.
That's fine. And tell a little bit about yourself so that people, document that, because in case nobody thinks to later.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that. You've got that. And talking about yourself, one of the things that I liked about that, you talk about something like, if you don't know what to write about, you've mentioned talk about something unique about yourself, maybe your experiences that you've had, some of the hobbies that you enjoy, and some of the causes that you're passionate about. And I think that's really great to be able to give people a bit of direction if that's new for them.
And if you, let's say you have older relatives who died before you even thought you wanted to ask them questions. Well, what kind of things would you have wanted to know? And then you can write down those answers for yourself. And if you don't want to do it, and if you have younger relatives, have them record you saying it or write your answers down. And if you do have older relatives still living who can answer questions for you, by all means ask them. But you got to be careful. Some people don't want to talk about certain things. So if you're approaching, if you're going to ask about the family legend of the missing baby and where the baby came from or went to, or it's like, they might not want to tell you. You might have to do some research and you may never know. But everybody knows their own family better than I do as far as what they can ask and what they can't ask.
Yeah. And it's a very personal journey.
And if you don't have to ask those touchy questions. You can ask them, what was life like when you were a little girl, grandma?
Yeah. This is so funny because even my kids are 16 and 18. They can't imagine a life without a smartphone. It's like,
right.
How on earth did you communicate when you were my age? And I'm like, well, we had a phone and it was actually attached to the wall and everybody could hear what you were saying. It's just beyond, they can't.
And so
they're still interested in hearing it. And as they
take for granted at our age, because we lived through it and we think it's boring because we lived through it, would be fascinating to them.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So it's
it's so true.
And it's not like we're talking of a, age difference of 100 years.
Yeah, no, exactly. So Hazel, just before we go, I wanted to ask you, so some of these things we've talked about, there's some practical steps in organising, if you're embarking on, either the sort of the lower level investment of time or more effort and time investment, but you've got a book that's either just been released or about to be released as we go to air now, about some worksheets that people can work through, that sort of some other things as well. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I'm interested to learn how this might be a resource for people too.
Sure. So throughout my organizing career, I've been creating what I call clutter flowcharts, and they help you figure out if something's clutter or not. Like take the pen for an example again. Is this clutter or is this not clutter? And it asks you, well, do you use it? Do you love it? Do you need to keep it? And if you don't know, or if the answer is no, then it's clutter and you need to get rid of it. And if you, but if this other pen is the one that grandpa made, it's like, yes, I love that. I don't use it, but I love it and I'm going to keep it. And so I say, okay, well, keep it in an organized manner, and so that you can find it when you need it. And so anyway, this flowchart helps people figure out what's clutter in all kinds of categories. There's the original flowchart, clutter flowchart, but there's also one for kitchens, one for closets, one for garages. There's 17 of them. And 2 of them pertain to our topic today of photos and genealogy. There's a photo clutter flowchart and a ancestry clutter flowchart. and by ancestry clutter flow, I think photo clutter would be, is this photo meaningful, or is it blurry and a mistake or a duplicate, or do you really need to keep it? And and there's a whole chapter about each type of clutter. And the name of the book is Go with the Flow, the Clutter Clearing Toolkit for an Organized Life. And to people who already know about clutter flowcharts, it's also known as the Clutter Flowchart Workbook.
Yes.
Fantastic.
We'll definitely put a link to the book in the show notes. Yeah.
And to the resources, because we've talked about a few great resources that we'll get some information off you just make sure that they're on there, like Family Search and the Whole Tree and Cindy's List maybe, or the family group sheets, or and your resources that you've got. So we'll put them in the show notes.
Resource roundups on my website. Even though I'm kind of downsizing my business, I'm planning to keep the resource roundups updated, and I'm still blogging.
Great information. Yeah, wonderful. I think that's been so great. Was there anything else that you wanted to, a burning question that you had, Chantel?
No, I can't think of one. No, I think we've done everything. Yeah, that's right. Now we got to do the work.
I know. I'm inspired. I'm absolutely inspired. And that's one of the things in the front pages of your book. You write that the book is intended to inspire readers to tell the stories of their photos, family, and things. And I really hope in this podcast episode today that we've been able to bring a little bit of that to our listeners, because it really is an inspiration. And we just thank you, Hazel, for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been really lovely to have you share some of your stories and insights and inspiration. So
thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Did you want to finish?
Do I do the...
Yes. Finish up, shall we?
Okay. So as always, and our regular listeners will know that you can sign up to our newsletter. We've not been very active on social media, but you can still reach us through socials if you've got any questions. But mostly, if you do have questions, please click on the link in the show notes or over on our website to get to the wish list. So you can put in your questions or any requests that you have that you might want us to talk about, topics and questions. So please don't be shy, fill in the wish list and we'll get back to you. And of course, we always welcome feedback and reviews. And I think that was it. So
absolutely.
I'm Chantel from Photos in Order. Thanks again, Hazel, for joining us. It was such a pleasure having you. And we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm Fiona from Photo Helper, and thank you, Hazel. And our lovely listeners, we'll put all the links in the show notes, and we will see you soon.